Let's continue with Crispin, The Cross of Lead by Avi. Chapter 21. He led us to a grove of trees. There he flung himself down and told me to do the same. That done, he called for his sack. He rummaged in it, producing more bread, which he tore and gave me half. When we had been silent for a while, I stood brooding over my unhappy fate. He said, "I don't think you care for me." "I have no choice," I said. "Would you like one?" "God's will be done," I said. He shrugged and said, "You might not believe it, but I was fated to be a priest in the city of York. That's far to the north." I looked at him anew. Father Quinnell was the only priest I'd ever known. This huge man could not have been more different. It seemed my father grew weary of me. Bear continued, "Since I caused too much trouble and ate too much in truth," he added, "since I caused too much trouble and ate too much in truth," he added with sudden bitterness, "I suspect he offered me to God to fulfill a pledge he'd made in exchange for some profitable trade. Though I asked you what kind of man would exchange a boy for a sack of wool." His question made me think about my father. I tried to imagine what kind of man he might have been if he had lived. What kind of man he might have been if he had lived, and if he would have done such a thing with me. "A punctilious man, my father," Bear went on. "He paid my fees in full, gave me his hasty blessing, and walked away. I never saw him more. Willy-nilly, I was enrolled in the Benedictine Abbey to be a monk, 12 years of age, younger than you, and already in robes. An acolyte." "Did you become a monk?" I asked. "I was at the Abbey for 7 years. I learned how to pray, how to be silent. I learned to read Latin, French, and even English. There's that. It keeps me from the gallows." "Why?" I said, for in spite of myself, I found myself interested in his story. "The law. If you can read, you're treated as a priest. Common law does not allow priests to be hanged." Shortly after, before I took my final vows," he continued, "when one went on some errand for my fat and greasy abbot, I came upon a group of mummers in a square close to the York Minster. Their music, tricks, and most of all, their laughter beguiled me. Perhaps it was the devil himself who took a liking to my soul. In any case, I ran off like you," he added with a laugh. But how could you abandon God?" I said. "Had he not abandoned me?" "It was your father, not God, who left you," I said. I must have surprised him with my words, for he grew silent. And when he spoke again, it was with less bravado. "For 10 years, I traveled with those people," he said. "They became my dearest friends. We went all about the kingdom. Mind you, we lived only a tad beyond beggary. But my companions taught me better languages. The language of song, of hand, of foot, and most of all, of laughter." "Can you still be hanged, then?" "Is that your hope?" "Not as long as I can read, but I did the next best thing. I went off to be a soldier." "And you abandoned your new friends?" "Not abandoned, disbanded. Only St. Anthony knows where they went. Some wandered off. Others lost their lives to brawls, jails, duels, or sickness. Some were lost to marriage. The wandering life, the murmur's life, is fragile at best, he shrugged. In any case, I'd rather be alone. Then why? I faltered. Why what? Speak up. Then why do you need me? I said. In response, he reached into his sack and pulled out the leather balls again. As before, he tossed them around and around, so that they seemed to float about his hands. Here, he said, holding out the balls to me. Let me see how skilled you are. Me? Of course you. I can't do such things. Saint Crispin, he barked, stand before me. Reluctantly, I took my place before him. Now pay attention, he said. Beginning with one ball, he demonstrated how to toss it and back, toss it back and forth between his hands. He told me to do the same. I did so, clumsily at first, but under his insistent commands, I began to grasp his method. There now, Bear said, watch this. He took up a second ball, and along with the first, began to throw it back and forth. Do that, he said. Tossing two balls between my hands was quite another matter. I could barely manage it. Again, he shouted, and again. When I failed, it was always severe, insisting I try over and over again. But at last, the balls began to fly for me. After sitting back and watching me intently with his shrewd eyes, he said, enough. We need to move on. You'll practice more. You'll add more balls. You'll add more balls as you go. Music, too. And I vow, by the joy of Christ, you'll learn it well. But why? I said. You shall see. We continued along the muddy road. This time, as we went, Bear sang at the top of his voice. Loudly sings the cuckoo, grows the seed and blooms the meadow. Comes the spring, the woods do sing. Sing cuckoo, now sing cuckoo. Sing cuckoo, now sing cuckoo. Then from his sack he took out a music pipe. A recorder, he called it, and began to play the same melody, after which he sang the verse again. Sing, he commanded. I don't know how. Crispin, if I bid you to sing, you'll sing, he said. Halting, I tried. Louder, I complied. As we went along, I was convinced more than ever that Bear was mad. Chapter 22. Toward early evening, Bear found a secluded spot some paces off the road. There he ordered me to stand against a tree. I hesitated. Do as I say, he said. Then I did. He pulled a twist of rope from his sack, and to my alarm proceeded to tie my hands behind the tree. What are you doing? What are you doing? I cried, seeing this as confirmation of his madness. I need to fetch some food, he said, pulling the knot tight. You'll only interfere, and I don't want you running off. But I swore I wouldn't, I said. I beg you, don't leave me here. Pff, he mocked. Pff, as God in heaven knows, both wheat and trust take a full season to grow. Without another word, he went off, leaving me alone. More than once I tested the knot, determined that despite my vow, I'd run off. But no matter how I tried, I could not get loose. Instead, my arms grew numb. How long he was gone, I don't know. Enough to fill my heart with more misery and make me swear violent oaths of him. I even screamed for help, though I knew help would never come. And when I caught sight of the sack he had left behind, I told myself he was bound to return, if not for me, for it. Sure enough, he did. What's more, a large fat rabbit dangled from his hands. There, St. Crispin, he said when he came into view, a great grin on his red-bearded face. Now you can see that for good or ill, I'll always keep my word. He untied me, faint from standing so long. My arms ached from being tied. I immediately sat down. Do you know the penalty for poaching? He said, as he worked his dagger skillfully to skin the rabbit. I was so angry I only shook my head. To feed us both, I've put both our lives in jeopardy, he said. That's the kind of freedom that exists in this kingdom. With flint, stone, and tinder, he made a fire, which he told me stoke with bits of wood. Then he took up the rabbit, spitted it, and soon he had it roasting. Do you like meat? Do you like meat? He said, seeing me with my mouth agape. I've only eaten it a few times, I confessed. A few times? He laughed uproariously. Ha 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 ha! Ah, Crispin, the blessed saints were kind when they guided you to me. For my part, I love meat. When he proclaimed the rabbit cooked, he tore it apart and gave me some. As I shoved the bits into my mouth with my hands, I admitted to myself it was the best food I had ever eaten. My resolve to flee abated somewhat. Later, when we had our fill, more meat than I had consumed at one time than in my entire life, and the embers of the fire had burned low, Bear told me to lie down on far side as he wished to speak to me. What madness, I wondered, would he reveal to me now? It had grown dark. The only light was our little fire. A breeze had sprung, which caused the flames to dance. Bear's red beard seemed to glitter in the firelight, so that his face, despite the dark, was equal to any sun. His bald head gleamed like the moon, or like a moon. Indeed, it was big enough to fill the entire sky. Then he began to speak of his many adventures, his riotous life, the marvels he had seen, the scrapes he had escaped, his fortune, good and bad. Never had I heard such tales. It was a world and life. It was a world and life, a way of being utterly unknown to me. What's more, everything he talked about was stitched with laughter. It was as if his life itself was a jest, except now and then he'd cry out with some awful anger at what he called the injustices of the world. Then he spoke of his soldiering days, fighting alongside the Black Prince in Gascony and Brittany. Our master has been fighting in France for so long, he said. I've never seen him. What's his name? Lord Furnival. Furnival, Bear said. Oh. That was Crispin who said, our master has been fighting in France, blah, blah, blah. What's his name? Lord Furnival. Furnival, Bear said. You'd be pleased to know his first home is in Great Wexley, where we're bound. I said, what manner of man is he? Bear shrugged. I saw him too much, a great landowner, and arrogant. What he lacked in fighting skills, he made up for in bragging, drinking, and killing. In that order. But he's a noble knight. He snorted. Do you think that makes him less mortal? By God's everlasting bones, Crispin, war is where the Christian is truly tested. Alas, your Lord Furnival was not one to inspire faith. If there was looting and cruelty to be done, he did more than his share, with a falcon's eye for ransom. As for those prisoners who would yield nothing, Bear waved his hands dismissively. Doomed regarding their fondness for women, I shan't say, but you may believe me, as Jesus shall be our judge, your Lord Furnival shall have much to answer for. His steward is cruel, I said. A suitable pair, Bear said. And what village is that? Stromford, I said before I could catch myself. When he lapsed into silence, I thought of what Bear said about Lord Furnival. It made me uneasy, thinking it might have been a mistake to reveal my connection and where I'd come from. There could be a danger if Bear was truly mad and we were going there, and yet He seemed to know so much more than any man I had met. How, I asked myself, would he consider me when he knew more of what I was? A fire smoldered, a breeze blew, a bird whistled. Into the dark, my uneasiness had just begun to subside when Bear said, "Now, Crispin, it's time I learned the truth of you." Chapter 23. I hardly knew what to say. I felt a desire to speak about what I was and what had happened, yet it did not seem proper. He was, after all, my master. I was his servant. We were not equal. But before I could think more on it, he said, "When did your mother die?" "A short time ago," I said. "May the blessed Saint Margaret care for her in heaven," he said, crossing himself. What manner of woman was she? Since no one had ever asked me about my mother, it was difficult to know where to begin. Just to think of her brought pain to my heart. "She was shunned by the others in the village," I said, "nor did she speak very much. When she did, she was bitter." "Why so?" "I don't know. Sometimes I thought it was because she was slight and frail. The steward, the bailiff, and the reeve always set her difficult tasks. More often than not, they made her work alone. But though she worked as hard as she could, she received little thanks." To my surprise, there was a relief in speaking. How strange it was to have someone listen to me. I went on. "Sometimes she would hold me to her. At other times, she seemed to find me, repulsive. Sometimes I thought I was the cause of her misery." "And your father?" "Oh, he died before I was born, in the pestilence." "No other kin?" "None." His eyes narrowed. "How can that be?" I shrugged. "My mother said they also died in the Great Death." "A common enough story. I escaped it." "How?" By running as far north as I could to Scotland's wild northern isles. Had your mother no surname?" "I never knew it." "Do you ever want to know these unknown things? About your name, your mother, your father?" "I do," I said, "but I don't know how." He was quiet for a while, as if thinking on what I said. Then he said, "Now, Crispin, tell me how you came to be proclaimed a wolf's head." Chapter 24. By then, I had slipped so easily into talking, I simply told him what had happened as much as I could recall. Yet, it did not seem proper. He was, after all, my master. I was his servant. We were not equal. Oh, that's not the right. Daggone it, what happened? Praise God. Hold one moment. Sorry about that. Okay. All right, so let me start back on 24. By then, I had slipped so easily into talking. I simply told him what had happened, as much as I could recall. When I had done, he asked, "And they proclaimed you a wolf's head for that?" I nodded. "To be a wolf's head is to say you're no longer human, so anyone can kill you." He grinned. "Even me." "But," he went on seriously, "your priest told you to flee, right?" "Yes. And since your steward tried to kill you, your priest was proved right." After a moment, I said, "And they killed Father Quinel." Bear sat bolt upright. "Killed the priest?" he cried. "In the sacred name of Jesus, why?" "I don't know, but when he told me I had to leave, as he promised, he'd tell me something of importance just before I left. Instead, he was slain." "Have you any idea what he was to say?" "Something about my father and mother. So I think his death was my doing. God was punishing me." "By killing his priest? It's a thing I've noticed. The big man said, it's by killing the priest. It's a thing I've noticed, the big man said with hanging scorn, that the greater a man's or a boy's ignorance of the world, the more certain he is that he sits in the center of that world. I hung my head. Crispin, he said after a moment of silence, I'll give you some advice. You're full of sadness. Those who bring remorse are shunned. Do you know why? I shook my head. Because sorrow is the common fate of man. Who then would want more? But wit and laughter, Crispin. Why no one ever has enough? When I think on the perfections of our Savior, I choose to think most upon his most perfect laughter. It must have been the kind that makes us laugh too. For mirth is the coin that brings a welcome. Lose your sorrows, and you'll find your freedom. I remember the word freedom as one which Father Quintal used. After a moment, I said, but you gave me no choice but to stay with you. His eyes flashed with anger, enough so that I regretted I'd spoken. But then, as happened so often with him, he laughed. Crispin, you do know why my head is split into two parts. No. Like all men with a skill, I wear the livery of my trade. For me, the two-part hat informs the world that there's more than a simple nature residing in my soul. There's bad and good. But I am only bad, I thought of myself. No. But I'm only bad, I thought of myself, wishing yet again I knew what sin was embedded in me to have brought God's hand so hard upon me. Crispin, said Bear, a wise man, he was a jester by trade, once told me that living by answers is a form of death. It's only questions that keep you living. What think you of that? I don't know, I said. Think on it. For we shall soon be passing out of this zone of desolation. From here on, as God is good, many living villages shall appear. They'll be small, but if we labor well, we can survive, you and I. Will you join me? I give you the freedom to choose. You're my master, I said. I have no choice. Crispin, decide, he barked. I shook my head. It's not for me to decide. Should every man not be master of himself? He asked. You made me call you master. His face grew redder than it normally was. You're a willful fool, he bellowed. Clearly frustrated, he poked the fire. You'll go. As you commanded. As you commanded, I said. He frowned, but only said, before we get there, you'll need to learn some things. What? Time enough for that tomorrow. Go to sleep. Without further ado, he lay down. From the pouch around my neck, I took out my cross of lead, and upon my knees began to prepare to pray. What are you doing? I heard him ask. I looked over my shoulder, praying. What's that in your hand? A cross of lead. It was my mother's, I said, holding it out for him to see. It even has writing on it. Writing on it? It's useless, he said, waving my hand away. No more than a trinket. What do you mean? I cried, fearing he was slipping back into madness. All these things, your cross, your prayers, as God is near, you surely, and surely he always is. He needs no special words or objects to approach him. But this cross, I began. He cut me off. I know what it is. It's made of lead, made in countless numbers during the Great Death. Never blessed. They were given to the dying as false comfort. They're as common as the leaves and just as sacred. Crispin, as Jesus is my witness, churches, priests, they're all unneeded. The only cross you need is the one in your heart. Greatly shocked, I didn't know what to say. But, he added with a hard edge of anger, if you as so much as poke my words in public. Do you know what happens to you? No. You'll be burned alive, so don't repeat them. And if you said I spoke them, I'd denounce you for a liar and a heretic. So put your cross away. I don't wish to see it again. Keep your faith to yourself. Although unsettled by his words, I turned away and made my prayers, the cross in my hands. I prayed to St. Giles and asked him to remember my father, who I'd never seen, my mother, whom I missed so deeply, and lastly of all, myself. I also promised him I'd not believe the things Bear had said. Though Bear must have heard me, he did not interfere. When I was done, I said, Bear, I'm sorry. I know so little. Sometimes it's better not to know. How can that be? Ah, Crispin, if I had learned one thing, it's that he who knows a bit of everything knows nothing, but he who knows a little bit, well, knows much of all. He said no more and was soon asleep, grunting like a pig. The fire had collapsed into a heap of smoldering coals. The night being cold, I drew closer to it and tried to make sense of the things that Bear had said. He had confused me. First, he said it was better to live by questions. Then he said it was a mistake to know everything. I struggled to put the two notions together, but could not. What I did know was that he was unlike any man I'd ever known. There was madness in him, to be sure, yet I could not deny some kindness too. But what vexed me most was his saying that every man should be masters of himself. If I knew anything, it was that all men belonged to someone. Surely God himself put us all in our places. Lords to rule and fight, clergy to pray, all the rest, like me, were on earth to labor, to serve as masters and our God. To serve our masters and our God. Otherwise, it was as much to say, stars could go their own way instead of being fixed to turn around our world. Bear had to be wrong. Yet I found myself thinking it was not so bad to have fallen in with him. To be sure, he was rough and ready. He was a rough and ready man. The things he said confused me. Even his calling me by the name Crispin was unsettling. Still, if Bear fed me and protected me, I might at least survive a while. In any case, I had little choice. God had willed it. And yet, thinking on what he said, I asked myself if I were to live by questions, what questions would they be? About my father? And those things Father Quinnell had said about my mother, if they be true or not. And maybe I asked what was to be my fate. Chapter 25. When I woke in the morning, I had spent so much time with Bear's strange ideas, I was in a cross mood, not wishing to deal with him. Nonetheless, he informed me that it was time to begin teaching me some skills. He explained how upon entering a town, he played and danced, heading straight for the village church. There I pray, hopefully at a mass. I said you didn't believe in such things. What I think, Crispin, stays in my head. What I do is therefore for all the world to see. I must show reverence. I don't understand you, I burst out, surprising even myself. You tell me I don't need a church. Then you talk like a priest. What are you? A man, nothing more or less. And you? Nothing. Why do you insist on that, Crispin? Because I have no name, I said, my rage bursting forth. Because I have no name, I said, my rage bursting forth. No home, no kin, no place in this world. I'm a wolf's head. Any and all may kill me when they choose. Even you say you want me to do things, think things, and when I won't be able to, you'll shun or betray me like the rest of them. I had never said so many words in one breath in all my life. When I'd done, I turned away, alarmed that I had spoken to my master in such a fashion. Crispin, in the name of all the blessed saints, have you ever desired to be anything different from what you are? We must be content to be as God made us, I said. What if God wishes you be better than yourself? Then he will do so. Crispin, he said, grabbing me by the neck and hauling me around. Come with me. He dragged me to a little stream where we had fetched our water. Have you ever seen what you look like? He said. A little like a river, but I don't like to. Gaze upon yourself, boy, he said. Puzzled, I did as he bid, staring at an image in the flowing water. My long hair, my dirty, bruised, and tear-streaked face, my red-rimmed eyes. Now then, he commanded, wash your face using sand to scrub it. Go on, or go by God, I'll do it for you. Or by God, I'll do it for you. After I did as he told me, he picked up his dagger. What are you doing? What are you going to do? Cut your hair. Now look at yourself again, he said when he was done. What do you see now? I considered my reflection anew. Are you different? He said. A little, I said. And that was all, only water and a blade. Think what you might become if you were cleansed of 13 years of dirt, neglect, and servitude. I turned back to my image and gazed. It was different. For a moment I allowed myself to wonder what it would be like to alter the rest of myself as well. As I was trying to tell you, Bear said, interrupting my thoughts, when I reach a village, I apply to the priest, to the local lord or bailiff, the reeve if necessary, anyone in authority from whom I can get permission to perform. And you wish me to go with you? I asked. Of course. But Bear, what if I'm recognized? Crispin, you are altered. Who would recognize you now? Anyone from Stromford. By the certainty of St. Paul, they are gone. They'll never bother you again. But what if they do? First, you say you are nothing. Then you say half the world is looking for you. Make up your mind. If you have one. But Bear, the steward tried to kill me twice. And when I was hiding in the woods, he came along the road. I'm sure he was searching for me. He looked at me slyly. For an insignificant creature, you're very vain. Give me one reason for their concern. They think I'm a thief. Crispin, did you steal? As God is my witness, no. Then it's all a shame. You were only being blamed for what someone else did. But it's they who matter, not me. Then I shall make you matter, he said. I'll teach you music. I won't be able to learn it, I said. Do the birds sing? He asked. Yes, they do. Do they have souls? I don't think so. I said, somewhat confused. Then surely you can sing no less than they, for you have a soul. Sometimes I think I have none. For once Bear was speechless. In the name of Saint Remigius. In the name of Saint Remigius. Why? I've never felt one. Bear gazed at me in silence. Then we, he said gruffly, shall need to make sure you do. Chapter 26. He began by instructing me about the pipes holes, the stops. He called them pipes holes and stops, and the way we shape my mouth around the blowing end, how to shift my fingers, how to make different sounds. Reluctantly, I took up the recorder and with fingers like soft clay tried to play. What came out were shallow squeaks. You see, You see, I said, I can't do it. I offered him back his pipe. Refusing, he railed at the top of his voice, threatening to inflict upon me every kind of grisly torture if I didn't try. At first, his shouted warnings terrified me, but as the day wore on, I realized he was mostly bluster. While I didn't doubt he could have done the ghastly acts he threatened, it was but a rough kindness. The more I realized this, the less tense I became. Gradually, I found my way with tongue, fingers, and breath. Before the day was half done, I managed to pipe out his simple song. "There, you've done it," he cried out when first I did. "Tell me that you didn't hear it too." No one was more amazed than me. To think that I, with my breath, could make a song thrilled me deeply. I wanted to play it over and over again. Bear only made me work harder. Then, as I played, he began to strike his drum so as to keep the proper beats. It was mid-afternoon, and I was playing when something different happened. Before my astonished eyes, this enormous man jumped up and began to dance, holding his large hands, pumping his knees high, prancing, his great red beard flapping, his two-pointed hat bobbing this way and that, the hat bells jingling. He was like one possessed. That, though a giant, he appeared as light as a goose feather in a swelling breeze. I was so taken aback at the sight, I stopped playing. "Now you know why I took you on," he said with a grin. It took a moment for me to fully grasp his meaning. He wanted me to help him. "Play, fool," he yelled. "That's the point of it all." Excited, I resumed, continuing to make music while he paused to scoop up his leather balls. For now, as he danced, he also juggled. Then to all of this, he added singing. "Lady Fortune is friend and foe. Of poor he makes rich, and rich makes poor also. Turns misery to prosperity, and wellness into woe. So let no man trust this lady, who turns her wheel ever so." Finally, he stopped, panting. He thumped me on my back and said, "There, Christian, my young and foolish soulless saint, you see what we shall do. While I perform my revels, you shall pipe the tune. I promise I shall bring us pennies of plenty, and we, the bear and his cub, shall prosper greatly." His words made me grin. At this, Bear thrust his hand aloft. "Oh God," he cried, "look upon thy miraculous gift. This wretched boy has given the world a smile." That night, as we made ready to sleep, Bear informed me that on the following day we would reach a village by the name of Burley. "It's only 2 leagues from where we are. An easy walk," he said. "And on the main road to Great Wexley. Bear's news about the morrow made me very nervous. Since I had left Stromford, the only person I had been with was him, but I said nothing. He would, I feared, only mock my worries. Instead, when Bear was asleep, I went upon my knees and with my lead cross in hand, prayed. "Blessed St. Giles," I whispered to the cross, "let me play the music well. Let me be a credit to my master. And I beg thee, let me have a soul, that I too may sing and dance like Bear. And St. Giles, do not let him betray me." Let's go on to chapter 27. This is good. Next morning, we set off at dawn, and soon were trudging along the dirt road. At that place, it meandered among low hills, so that we never had a clear view for very far. Only through the tree breaks did we catch glimpse of open fields. We had been going a little while when Bear abruptly halted. "What's the matter?" I said. "Look," he said, pointing to the sky. I saw nothing but a flock of wood pigeons swirling high above some trees, above some ways beyond where we were. "The pigeons?" I said. "They're agitated by something." "What?" "We'd best find out," he said. "Stay close." Straight away he looped off the road, and I followed. He led me into a small spinney, ample enough to hide us from view. Once there, he spied out. Without speaking, he pointed toward a hill some ways across the nearest field. When I nodded my understanding, he ran toward it. I kept close. Upon reaching the base of the hill, he dropped upon his knees and hands. Motioning that I should leave the sack behind, he began to crawl toward the hill crest. When he reached it, he pulled off his cap, then lifted his head just above the summit. After gazing a while, he turned slightly, beckoned me closer, and whispered, "Look, but be careful not to show yourself." Cautiously, I raised my head. What I saw before me was the road we'd been traveling on, but somewhat farther along. At a place that had been hidden from view was a small plank bridge spanning a river. Some 12 men were loitering about. A few were sitting on the ground. Others stood by the bridge. All were armed with swords and longbows. It was as if they were waiting for someone. Among them was one I recognized. "Bear," I whispered, my heart pounding. "It's John Aycliffe, the steward of Stromford village." Bear looked at me, but in a different way than he had before. Then at the men again. After a few more moments, he edged back. Pulling at my arm, he bade me follow. We went part way down the hill to a place where we would not be seen. Once there, he sat in silence while I waited anxiously for him to tell me what to do. "Crispin," he said with the utmost solemnity, "mortal men were never perfect. In my life I've done things I'm ashamed of, things that the all-seeing God shall see emblazoned on my soul. You said we proclaimed you a wolf's head. You said they proclaimed you a wolf's head because you stole. You deny you were a thief. It's not for me to punish you. God awaits. But I must know the absolute truth. By all that's sacred, did you or did you not do what they said you did?" The way he spoke distressed me. Even so, I only said, "No." He sighed and shook his head. "I believe you. But it makes no sense. They should be glad you fled. At least, you're a nuisance. Why are they searching so hard for you?" He wondered out loud. "And why should they think or care that you're heading for Great Wexley?" "How do they even know?" "This is the only road," he exclaimed. "You have anything to say to this?" "I told you they would come after me." "You were right. I should have listened more. But Crispin, there must be something more here. There must be something more here. More than you know." Whatever satisfaction I had in hearing him admit that I was right paled when I saw his alarm. "What are we going to do?" I said. We'll go no further along this road," he said. "That's certain. But I must go forward. We'd better strike across there," he said, pointing beyond the fields toward some outlying woods. "It'll take us away from those men and your steward." Without further ado, he rose and marched off with great strides. I rushed to keep up, more than once looking back. As we went along, I kept thinking how Bear had noticed the birds, which allowed him to see the soldiers. If I told myself I would stay alive in this new world, I must learn such skills as he had. The sooner I learned, I told myself, the longer my life. The end of these chapters.